What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today we are going to do an overview of the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. This is the first and the second one, and not only that, but some of Sony's plans with what they wanted the Amazing Spider-Man franchise to be compared to what Mark Webb wanted the Amazing Spider-Man franchise to be. So, without further ado, because this is my third take having to do this, because again, this happened yet again. The second take was going so well, and then for some reason a big interruption happened, and I was just mad because it was 31 minutes in. So without further ado, let's just kind of do it. Not only a mini review of the Amazing Spider-Man, but also, as I said, Sony's plans, because it was very more evident in the Amazing Spider-Man 2. So when we come to the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, this was the quickest turnaround for a reboot in cinematic history at that moment. The third Spider-Man movie from Sam Raimi was back in 2007, and this movie, directed by Mark Webb, came out in 2012. So this was the quickest turnaround that a studio has done for rebooting a property, but that would only get beaten just a couple of years later by the MCU Spider-Man reboot, which only took 2 years for the reboot to happen. That's a crazy turnout for another version of Spider-Man, but hey, that's what Sony is doing whenever a franchise doesn't really go their way. But anyways, when it comes to the Amazing Spider-Man 1, this movie has a lot of issues that a lot of reboots go through, but at the same time, it has a lot more pros for me, that the pros outweigh the cons when it comes to this first Amazing Spider-Man movie. So, without further ado, what is my take on Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man? I know it's the popular norm now to love Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man since his love got blossomed in Spider-Man No Way Home, but Andrew was always my favorite because he really nailed the personality of Spider-Man. Although I really enjoy the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, and I do love Tobey's Spider-Man in his own endearing way, he didn't, I mean, he was like Spider-Man in some aspects. I'm not going to say he didn't feel like Spider-Man from the comics, but when we're comparing the three in terms of the one that is the most similar to how Spider-Man acts in the comics to a certain extent, is going to be Andrew Garfield's take on the character. Also, with the whole he's too handsome to be Peter Parker and all this other like nonsense people have thrown in, like the skateboarding. Like, although the skateboarding, yeah, I could have took it or leave it with that, but also just that he's too handsome to be Peter Parker. He's too handsome. And I mean, A, Peter Parker has always kind of been handsome when you've read the comics, and but also B, it's a Hollywood movie. Hollywood's gonna cast attractive people to play these roles because they want people to see these movies. And the third thing, which I'm surprised not a lot of people have pointed out, why does nobody call out Tom Holland for being extremely handsome? They still love his Spider-Man, but that was never a complaint that his Spider-Man was too handsome to play the role. So yeah, I feel like a lot of those criticisms were kind of stupid in my opinion. It just felt very like nitpicky almost. It's like they wanted him to be like the Sam Raimi version, and that's kind of the problem with the reboot. You have fans that want it the way they knew it, which is like the Sam Raimi movies, and then you have fans that just do not want another retreading. And I feel like the Amazing Spider-Man had this problem where it had to retread the origin story. Because, in my opinion, The Amazing Spider-Man is the story of two movies. When the movie is focused on the relationship between Peter and Gwen, Captain Stacy doing a manhunt on Spider-Man because he's a vigilante and they're trying to catch him. It's about Peter and Dr. Carter's working together to create a serum to help the disabled people, but it backfires and he becomes the Lizard, which we're going to talk about a little bit. When we talk about those aspects of the movie, the aspects that don't have to follow the origin story, that's where I think The Amazing Spider-Man truly shines. And that's where the movie becomes, probably could have been one of my favorites, if not my favorite origin story for Spider-Man. Because I really like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, because it's still really good. But The Amazing Spider-Man is also really good, but there's stuff that holds it down a little bit. So let's focus on the origin story half, and this is where a lot of those criticisms for this movie are actually kind of valid. The way the spiders are just bitten on Peter, it was so needlessly unnecessary. You could say that Oscorp is creating a radioactive spider project. That has been said in every adaptation that does Peter Parker's origin story. But the problem here, I guess the problem here is just that it's the way it happens, that he has to conveniently go into this door, this room that's private and whatever. He has to go in there, and then some like, is somebody really gonna go in to scientific experimented spiders, a room full of them, walk in there and just kind of look at them and let them all go over you and stuff? And it was just like, it was like, wow, you're just trying so hard to be different from the simple radioactive spider escapes the project and bites Peter. Like, we did all that unnecessary stuff just to get there. And then you have the unnecessary way of how Uncle Ben says, with great power, there must come great responsibility. I still loved it, but you could tell, oh man, we can't really just exactly do what the Sam Raimi version did. So let's have Uncle Ben say it in a more convoluted way that still tells the message and was still fine. But it was like, you could just tell, oh man, we can't do this with the, because this will be too simple. Let's just say Raimi Spider-Man. And then you also had the way Uncle Ben died. Now, I still felt bad when Uncle Ben died, because I'm going to talk about the pros. I actually really liked Uncle Ben as a character, but the reason why I think MCU Spider-Man has been scared to even touch Uncle Ben is simply because you just can't do it as well as how Sam Raimi did it. And that's because that was the one where he was so one-to-one to the comics that any deviation or any reboot, you're either just going to have to do an exact copy of what they did with that, or you're going to have to do a completely different take. And in this version, you have a robber come into a corner store or deli that Peter's buying milk from. The cashier's already kind of a dickhead to him, so you don't really feel bad for the cashier when he gets robbed. But yeah, also the wrestling promoter was kind of a dickhead to Peter, and then he wants him to help catch the robber. Okay, even though, again, the cashier was needlessly a dickhead. The wrestling promoter only really just cut half of Peter's money. And he was like, it is what it is. And you know what? That's show business, whatever. But like, the cashier was just needlessly a dick to Peter. And he's like, come help me, man. I'm getting robbed. And Peter's like, it's not my problem, because it's not his problem. But then the robber leaves. He bumps into Uncle Ben. He drops his gun. And Uncle Ben decides to just try to take away the gun from him. And then he gets shot. And then Peter sees, oh man, he got shot. Oh my God, Uncle Ben. And it's like, again, overdoing it. Sure, the wrestling promoter was a dick to the robber, to Peter, I mean, and then the robber robbed from him. And Uncle Ben gets shot because the robber was trying to steal Uncle Ben's car, and Uncle Ben was telling him no. But it's not even like they made it has to where Uncle Ben was trying to stop the robbery. He was literally just trying to take the gun away from the guy because he saw the gun fall off. And it's kind of like, it's a sad scene because I feel bad for Peter in this instance. And I really feel bad that Uncle Ben is dying and the implications of what happens after. The way we got there, again, it's like they're needlessly overdoing it because the Sam Raimi movie did it so perfectly simple, but they can't redo it like that because it's going to be considered a poor imitation of that. And that's kind of at the expense of being a reboot. It's not really at the expense of Amazing Spider-Man as a film, because that's just how it is. You know how audiences are going to react. So that's just kind of the issues with that. But there's another issue I have with the movie. But I want to go into the positives because, as I said, I love Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. He's probably my favorite out of the live-action cinematic adaptations of the character. He has the wit of Spider-Man. He has the quips. He has the speed, the agility. He just has everything there is to love about Spider-Man. And I really like the scene where, the car falls off the bridge and Peter saves the kid in the car. And he puts the mask over him. And he saves the kid by saying, just believe in me. Like, put the mask on so you can feel powerful, so you can feel like a hero. and he saves the kid from, the car. And then the father asks Peter, he puts his mask back on anyways, but he asks Peter, "What's your name?" And he says, "I'm Spider-Man." And he returns to his room, and he looks at his mask, and he really starts to understand the significance of being Spider-Man. That's what I love. Those type of scenes, I love it. I love that. I love those scenes. It makes me like Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker and Spider-Man a lot more. And I know a lot of people say, well, Tobey got Peter and Andrew got Spider-Man, but Tom got best of both. But I'm like, I think Andrew, in a way, got the best of both. I think all three of them, in their own way, got the best of both. But they're just harping on different aspects of Peter Parker as a person. And Andrew Garfield's really leaning into the outcast, the social outcast Peter Parker, because in the 60s, Peter Parker felt like a social outcast. Even when he was Spider-Man in the high school era, he still felt like an outcast. So I think they were leaning on that a lot. And really, the only person he could connect to is Gwen Stacy, because his relationship with Aunt May is a little different. And that's because Aunt May is also processing the death of Uncle Ben a little differently. So again, another amazing scene, pun intended, where she confronts Peter after he has an outing being Spider-Man, and she sees his being up face, and she kind of confronts him, like, "You can't get the eggs," and he's like, "Oh man, just go to sleep," and she just kind of is just so open to him. It's like those human scenes in the Amazing Spider-Man where you're like, if Mark Webb did not have to have the contrivances of having to redo the origin story and fully got to do a Spider-Man story where, let's just say, Uncle Ben has already died, he's already been Spider-Man for a couple of months, The Amazing Spider-Man might be regarded as one of the best Spider-Man movies ever, I think. But there's a lot of things that hold it back. Gwen Stacy, played by Emma Stone, she's great. She's just amazing. She's a great love interest. She's very supportive to Peter, but she also kind of calls him out on his bullshit. She does her own thing. She's not really a damsel in distress. I mean, yeah, sure, she does at the end need to get saved by the lizard, but that's because she's willingly doing a selfless act trying to stop the lizard and what he's doing. And Peter's trying to be like, "Gwen, don't do that. Mother Hubbard." But and then, her relationship to her father, Captain Stacy, and how Captain Stacy's doing a manhunt on Spider-Man. And the dinner scene. There's so many iconic scenes in this movie. The dinner scene where Captain Stacy and Peter Parker are arguing about the pros of having Spider-Man in New York and the cons of having Spider-Man in New York, and how their views of why Spider-Man is good for the city, why Spider-Man isn't great for the city, is very interesting, because you're like, oh shit, yeah, if one day somebody was actually like Spider-Man, everybody's not going to be like, oh, okay, well, he's the town's hero. It's going to be a little bit more divisive, which I like. That they kind of handled that. But at the end, you have Captain Stacy's death scene, and he's telling Peter, "Don't bring Gwen into you being Spider-Man." I kind of wished he was like more like, "Oh, Peter, protect Gwen, because we're gonna feel the loss of, her in the second movie." But he just tells her, "Get away." And the funeral scene, I felt like Peter could have been at the funeral scene a little bit, but again, I understand he had to act like a dick because he was like, "I'm trying to get you out of this life." But it adds more to a problem with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But for The Amazing Spider-Man as a film, it works. A few more things I want to add in. As I said, I loved Aunt May and all that stuff. But let's talk about the lizard. I really like the beginning of what they were doing with Dr. Connors and the lizard. Peter trying to help him create this cure. And, how he's creating a cure that's supposed to be for Norman Osborn. But it backfires on him. It makes him the lizard because he gets reptilian arms, and it starts to affect his brain, and now he's the lizard. But the lizard's main objective at the end of the movie is just kind of an eye roller, because you're like, oh, okay, the lizard wants to mutate everybody in New York City into a lizard, and it's just kind of like, you could have done a little better. I would have liked it if it was just more, oh, Spider-Man has to stop the lizard from killing Dr. Connor's boss, because, he's like, this guy's been a dick to me. He's been really forcing me to do this. I'm just going to kill him. I'm going to get my revenge at the people at Oscorp, and then Peter's trying to stop him. I feel like that would have been more interesting than, oh, the lizard wants to turn the whole city into lizards, and it was just kind of meh. But then, oh man, the scene where Peter loses his webbing, and then all the crane people come in because Guess what? The kid that he saved, his father, is a crane. He's a construction worker, and they light up the cranes for him so that he's able to swing to Oscorp. That was great. So, The Amazing Spider Man is a movie where it has a lot of amazing things, pun intended, but it also has a lot of things that are like kind of stupid in it. And you're like, wow. But Flash Thompson is also great. I forgot to almost mention Flash Thompson. This is the best cinematic version of Flash Thompson. The scene, again, I'm just pulling out scenes, but the scene where Peter pushes him up at the locker because it's after Uncle Ben's death, and Flash is like, oh, you feel powerful now. It feels powerful, right? And he's comforting Peter in a way. He's not being a dick to him because he just lost his uncle. And then later on, when Flash becomes a big fan of Spider-Man at the end of the movie. Like, I really love Flash Thompson as a character. And I kind of wish The Amazing Spider-Man 2 kind of kept Flash Thompson. I think Flash, they could have did what the comics did and make it like Flash is a bully to Peter. But later on in their lives, Flash becomes one of Peter's best friends. And I kind of wish they did that, but like this was only a one-time thing. But still, out of the other two Flashes we've had, this is the best version of Flash we've had ever in cinema, in both live action and so far animated. But it's realistically looking like this is the best cinematic version of Flash. That's not gonna get topped for a while. So that's great. That's great. So overall, The Amazing Spider-Man does have a lot of issues, mainly just the origin story and then the Peter Parker parent stuff, which although I liked in this movie, has a way for Peter to be stuck up in the past and then having to later on learn to let go of the past, especially when Uncle Ben dies. He has to let go of it, but not forget the past, but he has to let go of it to move forward, to have the people in his life, like Gwen, like Aunt May, like look forward to that, like focus on more of the people that are in your life in the present. I would have liked if they just left it there, but no, there's something bigger they have for Peter Parker's parent storyline, and I did not care for it. I did not care for it at all. And so it's just The Amazing Spider-Man. I still enjoy this movie, but I do acknowledge that there's some issues where I'm like, you could have did without it. You could have did without it. But overall, The Amazing Spider-Man is a 7 out of 10. Which leads us into The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a not great movie. It's probably one of my least favorite, I was about to say MCU Spider-Man, but it's probably one of my least favorite Spider-Man films alongside Far From Home. And The Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's some good aspects, so let's give it. Andrew Garfield has Spider-Man, of course. Emma Stone has Gwen Stacy, of course. I feel bad for forgetting the Aunt May's actress because she's an iconic well, not iconic, but she's a well-known actress. But she did great with Aunt May in this movie, and obviously the relationship between Peter and Gwen and Peter and Aunt May. Although there are some cons with the Peter and Gwen stuff because, I mean, that was from the last movie. You have to deal with Peter going back with Gwen after some time has passed, but then he remembers, oh shit, her father died. And he told me to get away from that. So he's like, I have to break up with you, but like he breaks up with her during her graduation dinner. Which is the worst time to do that because like that's just an awful time to do it. But he does it anyways. And then the whole rest of the movie, he kind of is a lovesick puppy for Gwen. He does kind of meet her up again, and then he has to go off to be Spider-Man, and then it's just very on and off. So I don't think their relationship in the second movie is as strong as it is in the first one, especially when Peter is just being Spider-Man, and he's just mostly just stalking her because he feels bad, and you know, he's willing, like he loves her so much that he's like, you know what, fuck it, I don't care. I'm gonna go all the way to London to be Spider-Man. I'm gonna go everywhere for you, which is great. That's a great love story. That's a great love story. But also, it's like, I mean, I understand why Peter said that. Peter just loves Gwen so much he's willing to go anywhere for her. But then you're like, Peter, you still have a responsibility to be Spider-Man in New York. But I mean, as we all know, Peter does end up going to London to be Spider-Man. It's just not this version of Spider-Man that ends up going to London. So there's that at the very least. So hey, maybe Peter does get his wish in another universe. But when you take out all those pros, you have the cons. You have some scenes that are great. You have some really great scenes like Peter and Mace talking to each other about where she puts Uncle Ben's stuff. Peter looking at Gwen Stacy's speech from the computer, and all this other stuff, and it's great. It's great. These are great scenes. But then you have Electro, who is this nerdy guy that gets burned by the superhero, and wants to be evil because Spider-Man forgot his name because he couldn't really tell. And then he's like, oh, I'm going to kill Spider-Man. And you have Dane DeHaan's Green Goblin, who is Norman dies because of a goblin disease. So that's what they were kind of setting up in the first movie, that Norman Osborn's dying of a disease, and Dr. Connors was supposed to create a cure until he became the Lizard. But you have him dying at like a pretty old age. I mean, which means we're not going to get Norman Osborn as Green Goblin, which is again an instance of the reboot having to do something different to the first original movies. But, you know, they're still doing Harry Osborn as Green Goblin, which is fine. Except the way they handled it. Because instead of Harry Osborn having an actual legit reason to hate Spider-Man, he's just mad that Spider-Man didn't give him his blood. Because Peter didn't know, or at least Spider-Man didn't know how his blood would affect Harry as the Goblin. And then you have these scenes where you have Peter, well, not Peter, but it's more Harry just going through this whole thing where the whole board tries to kick him out, and then he becomes evil, even more evil, because they're trying to kick him out of his company, his father's company. But I'm like, realistically, in that situation, Harry, you have decades of your life to worry about the goblin disease. It would have been different if they said, oh, the goblin disease gets to you earlier for every generation, every generation, the goblin disease kills you faster and faster at a younger age. And so it makes sense like, oh, there's a ticking time clock. But when the ticking time clock is like, what, Harry's like 18 and his dad died in his like late 50s? Harry has a lot of his life left to not worry about this goblin disease. I mean, sure, he could create a serum, but I don't think it would be his top priority right now. I think his top priority would be like, okay, I have to take over the company from my father. But then he hates Spider-Man anyways because he didn't give him the blood. And then he finds out Peter is Spider-Man when he puts the pieces together, and then he threatens Gwen. But it does lead to an amazing scene. Not pun intended this time, but, you know, so I didn't really care for the whole Green Goblin storyline they did. I didn't really care for the Electro storyline. Rhino was done horribly in this movie. You have Paul Giamatti acting like a fucking whack job in this movie. With the super thick Russian accent, he's like, I'm the Rhino! And he's mowing over people. You have Spider-Man making quips. And people are dying in this situation. And I understand Peter does make quips in dire situations. But people are legit actually dying. He's rolling over people and Peter is still making quips. That was the wrong time to do quips. I think Peter should have took the situation more seriously. But that's just a gripe. That's not me saying, oh my God, this ruins the whole movie for me. It's like, you know, Peter, you should probably tone down all the quips. Even though they're funny. They're great quips, actually. But it's like you gotta tone it down. And also, I think there was a criticism that the first movie was a little too dark. So this movie, they try to liven it up. Both literally how the movie The Amazing Spider-Man was shot. But also, like, in terms of, oh man, this is just a dark, edgy reboot. And they try to switch it up. They try to make it more lighthearted. They try to make it more brighter. And it does, in a way, lead to some of the best visuals, if not the best visuals, that a live-action Spider-Man film has ever done. Just visually, how the movie looks. But there are a lot of, like, the Four Sinister Six setup. Felicia Hardy is in this movie. Does she become Black Cat? No. She's just there to be Harry's assistant. And the way his Green Goblin is just so goofy. He's not even threatening. He's just goofy. He's just goofy when you look at him. And like there are some cool moments, like the first action scene between Spider-Man and Electro, and the final fight between Spider-Man and Electro. And then let's talk about the death of Gwen Stacy, because I feel like a lot of people were like, okay, they already knew Gwen Stacy was kind of gonna die. If you know the comics, you know that's her fate. Or I was about to say faith. That's her fate. But people were like, damn, Emma Stone, this is an actress at the height of her popularity. Her and Andrew Garfield have great chemistry. It's one of the multiple things praised about those movies. And then they kill her. And that's not a con. I think that makes it more shocking. Because there's so many factors you're like, when you read the comics and you hear Gwen Stacy, you're like, okay, Gwen Stacy's gonna die. But then, you have the Amazing Spider, not the Amazing Spider-Man, the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, which Amazing Spider-Man was also heavily based off of, where Gwen Stacy doesn't even really die in that, but Gwen Stacy is a completely different character in that, so let's not compare. But then you have Peter and Gwen's relationship be one of the biggest aspects of these movies. And then you have Emma Stone being the hottest actress, and you're like, now if you're a moviegoer in 2014, you're like, yeah, they're not gonna kill Gwen Stacy. Some of the marketing kind of teased it, which I think was a stupid decision. But Sony is known for spoiling their movies in marketing. I mean, hell, they're doing it with Across the Spider-Verse. They already spoiled one of the cameos in the movie, but the moment where she actually dies is such a well done scene that I would not change anything about it. There's a deleted scene where Peter is so upset by it that he just beats the shit out of Green Goblin until he almost dies. And part of me would have liked it in the cut because it would have added more gravity, but I think enough gravity was in the situation. Gwen dies, and she's not coming back. She doesn't even come back. She doesn't come back. And that's one of those deaths where in the comics it was shocking because the love interest doesn't really die. Like Peter Parker, that's Peter Parker's girlfriend. That's the love interest. She doesn't really die. But she died in the comics. And for the most part, despite the convoluted stuff, the main Gwen Stacy that died on the bridge never came back. But when we're talking about comic book movies, that was also the same case. The love interest never dies in these movies. And this was, I could be wrong, but I think this was legit the first comic book movie where the love interest just dies. And she does not come back. And that is where I was like, okay, Amazing Spider-Man 2 did this very well. So you have, again, except this time for me, the positives do not outweigh as much as the negatives. Because we also have another negative scene. And it's Peter Parker learning about his parents, which I never really cared for this storyline in the second movie. Because he learns that Peter Parker, is the only one that can have Spider-Man powers because his father puts DNA in the spiders to make it that only Peter Parker can access these powers because he was scared of what Oscorp was going to do with them. And I don't like that decision. I think the whole point of Spider-Man is that anybody could be Spider-Man. Anybody could get bitten by the radioactive spider, but Peter was the one to get bitten. It's the way Peter handled becoming Spider-Man that makes his journey resonating. As opposed to, it was always his destiny to be Spider-Man. He's the only one that could be Spider-Man. That's it. And it kind of just makes it lame in a way. Because it's like, well, now Peter's like the only guy that can do it, which means that he was right not to give it to Dane DeHaan's Green Goblin because his blood could have actually killed him. Which I guess supports his point, but I felt like that kind of threw away the main idea of what Spider-Man is and why so many people resonate with Spider-Man. So, again, this is another movie, except at least with the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, there's a lot more things I like in it. There are good things in this movie. So when I say it's one of my least favorite Spider-Man movies, I'm not ignoring the good aspects of this movie. There are some really great aspects of this movie, but it's still not a good movie. It's still a mess. It still tries to force Sinister Six, so many other storylines at once. It's still a clusterfuck of a movie. You have Paul Giamatti's Rhino, but then you also would have great scenes of Spider-Man coming back to the city, help saving the kid from Rhino who believed in Spider-Man. Yeah. So it's like, and this is, in my opinion, where I feel like Sony realized their meddling went too far. It already went too far in Spider-Man 3, where it kind of ruined what Sam Raimi wanted to do with that movie. Their meddling was a little bit more toned down for The Amazing Spider-Man. But The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I think this is where Sony's meddling was at its worst. It was the worst meddling of a comic book movie I've ever saw. Ever. It was horrible. Because you have a movie that Mark Webb wanted to make, and you have the movie Sony wanted to make. And what the movie Sony wanted to make was a movie that was able to launch their Sony Spider-Man cinematic universe, and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 just did not end up being there. Now, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was not a flop. It grossed $705 million, but that is lower than what the first one made, which is around $750 million. $752 million, I believe. But you see the 702 and the 752, and that's a large drop-off. That's a huge drop-off. You lost, that's $50 million less than the first one. And I think that's when Sony realized, oh, we fucked up with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So overall, it is one of my least favorite Spider-Man movies. So I'll have to give it a 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10. But the story's not done with the Amazing Spider-Man films because a lot of craziness happened. Sony, I mean, it was unknown if they wanted to. So this was part of Sony's plans. We're going to talk about what went on with Sony. So Sony's plans was that they wanted to do Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4. They obviously wanted to do a Sinister Six movie. That wasn't anything anybody was surprised by. They've been trying to do a Sinister Six movie for years. They tried to do it with some of the Raimi villains, but Raimi kept killing all of his villains. And then, obviously things didn't end up well with Sam Raimi. But ironically enough, they wanted Sam Raimi back to do a Spider-Man movie. It was unknown if they were going to boot Mark Webb from the Amazing Spider-Man franchise and would want Sam Raimi to do it, or if they wanted Sam Raimi to do a spin-off Spider-Man film. You have a Black Cat Silver Sable movie. You had an Aunt May spy movie they wanted to do. There was a Spider-Man 2099 spin-off movie they wanted to do with Miguel O'Hara in live action as opposed to animated. But out of all of these, Spider-Man 2099, I mean, he isn't getting his own movie, but he is finally going to be on the big screen in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which at the time making this video comes out Friday. Then you have a Venom movie. But this version of Venom is very different from the one that actually came out. So out of all of these, the only one that was made was Venom. And it's a completely different version to what they wanted Venom to be, because the original version was going to have Venom and Carnage. And there was a Spider-Man movie where Spider-Man was actually going to go to London. But as I said, that would happen later on in the Spider-Man franchise, but not with Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. But obviously, probably the biggest blow Sony did was that they had a big event in Japan where they were going to announce The Amazing Spider-Man 3. However, Andrew Garfield that day became sick, and then I think the people at Sony Japan complained about it. And they were like, oh, he doesn't want to do the event. He's making up excuses. And would Sony of America be reasonable to say, well, he is sick. He can't attend the event. Do not be mad at him. He's just sick, but we're still going to keep him as Spider-Man? Or B, are they complete assholes, agree with Japan, and just fire Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man? And that's what they did. They fired Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. And there's been some plot leaks about The Amazing Spider-Man 3, and there are videos out there about more detailed about what Sony's planning to do after the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. So if you want to look for that, I'm going to send a video up in the right corner. I'm going to send it up somewhere. It's going to pop up, trust me. But You could check out that video. But I think the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, the nail on the coffin, was when they fired Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. Because you can't have an Amazing Spider-Man movie without Andrew Garfield. And so, basically, the franchise was done. Their plans, their cinematic universe was not launched properly. The only movie to really be made out of all of these was Venom. And it's a completely different version of Venom. So, I think Sony absolutely dropped the ball. They didn't know what to do with the Spider-Man franchise. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was critically panned at the time. People hated The Amazing Spider-Man 2. They did not like it. Which led to Sony ultimately making a deal with Marvel in early of 2015 to make a deal, not sell the rights, but make a deal to where Spider-Man can now be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And there were ideas, again, as I said, of Andrew Garfield Spider-Man showing up in the MCU, but that was slashed when they fired him. There was also, apparently, the Avengers movie wanted to show an Oscorp building in the movie, which would have been a reference to the Amazing Spider-Man. So there were plans to have Andrew Garfield be the Spider-Man that enters the MCU, but again, as I said, after they fired him, they just recast it. So they were going to reboot Spider-Man again. But I'm not going to talk about that right now. That's a story for another time, because obviously that's going to lead into the most current, or the current iteration of live action Spider-Man, which is MCU Spider-Man. But in conclusion, how do I feel about the two Amazing Spider-Man movies that we had? And I really like the first one. I actually do. Even though it has some issues, I really enjoy the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. But for me, what holds back this franchise, what holds back me really loving this duology, is the Amazing Spider-Man 2. And the amount of problems that's in it, the amount of messy stuff, the amount of decisions they did, I didn't really care for a lot of it. But I still love Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, and hell, even though I don't like the Amazing Spider-Man 2, if I put on the first movie, I'm gonna put on the second movie. And the ice cream truck is out there, so it's not you outside, it's not you right now listening, unless the ice cream truck is not coming through, but we can cut this, or I'm not gonna cut it, whatever. But anyways, conclusion time. Damn, it's getting louder. Damn. But anyways, in conclusion, with the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, I think Sony really dropped the ball with it, and they could have done better. But overall, I still enjoy these movies. Even if I don't like any Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's still stuff where I'm like, it's a little entertaining. So overall, next video will be about the MCU Spider-Man trilogy. And then finally, we will get to an overview about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, as we are on Spider-Man week, and we are on the build to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.